Go ahead, Carol.
Okay, so we're all here somewhere. Okay, so welcome everybody and those who may be coming later. We have, as you know, our Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse Oliver. I'm sure we have, she's thinking of all the ways that she can just restrict voting, and she'll be talking to us about that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But what I want to tell you are two things. One is Amanda White, who's with N3B, will be speaking with us in August, where I will try not to make my eye appointments or any appointment, which I'm doing today. But she's going to be talking about the stormwater monitoring program that's going on, and you'll get more information about that. Next thing I want to tell you is that that there is that school board where, although we won't be voting unless you live in the mountain. Well, you don't get to vote at all on this particular thing, but they will be appointing someone, but we will be able to listen to the three candidates. And I believe that the school district, who I'm going to call later today, is going to set up a Zoom, or I guess you can go there. I probably, but I'm going to try to get that information and send it out as a friendly reminder sometime in the next couple days. And the other thing, last thing, is that Lynn Jones, who's now not on my screen, but is somewhere around, will be taking over from me, who made an appointment for 1 o'clock at iAssociates. So I have to leave to go there. And so if I may or may not get to say goodbye to you, Maggie. But anyway, so that's sort of the big picture. And I think you are set. Okay, so Maggie's planning to talk a little bit and then you have questions. And if not, she'll keep talking. Up to you. Okay, Maggie, you all set?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Carol Ann. Hi, everybody. I see a lot of, hi, Judy, a lot of friendly faces and lots of soldiers in the fight for voting rights and folks that I've been honored to work with over the years. Thank you all for being here. As those of you who know me know, I absolutely love the league, love working with you all. And I spent some time as we were embarking on the last legislative session this year. We were getting a lot of pressure to do a lot of election reform stuff. And unfortunately, I think the politics of the session and sort of the, very beginnings of coming out of COVID and the legislature, anybody who participated at all in the legislative session, everyone was just in a bad mood. The politics were awful. The Capitol was locked down and surrounded by National Guards people and stuff. So, we didn't have a very successful year on sort of the moving voting rights forward front, or, continuing to modernize and reform elections, although we did have some success. But I was thinking about it. We have accomplished so much here in New Mexico over the last decade, maybe the last 15 years, ever since we went to all paper ballots in 2006, which the League was, of course, one of the main organizations that really fought for that, to bring that to fruition. And, fast forward to 2020, where in my humble opinion, and actually in the opinion of most folks, if not 99.999% of the folks in the election administration community, not only was it the election with the most votes cast ever nationally, it was the safest, most secure election, best run, best managed, with incredible integrity, and considering that had to be done during the pandemic when so many changes had to be made on the fly to try to accommodate the health and safety of our voters. And, so much litigation. I don't know if you all are aware, but there were more pre-election litigation, more cases in advance of the election, sort of dealing with election administration and rules and things than in any other election we'd ever seen. And despite all of that, we had this wildly successful election. And I just, I'm very proud of how far we've come, not only nationally, but particularly here in New Mexico, because when I first came into office as a county clerk in 2007, we were struggling. And, we had one really good policy. We had early voting. We had paper ballots, and we've had to really move it forward since there. And I'll talk a little bit here towards the end of my talking piece about some of those, but let me kind of set the stage first for what I think you are all aware of, which is that we are in this really difficult place here nationally. There has been a huge sort of reaction and backlash as a result of, what we are all referring to as the big lie, which is, of course, that the former president claims that the election was rigged, fraudulent votes were cast. There's this sort of grand conspiracy to deny him re-election. Obviously, we saw that really culminate in the tragedy of January 6th with the insurrection. And I'm sure you all probably felt exactly the same way I did that day, which was just that we were experiencing an incredible tragedy for our country, right? And just this sort of overwhelming feeling of, wow, we're in trouble. Our democracy's in trouble. And I think the truth is that it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for this group. I mean, this group has been fighting for voter rights for over 100 years now. So of all the people in this country, the League of Women Voters knows, what it takes to move our democracy forward and what the struggle has been. But I also see really great opportunity in pushing back on this really cynical, ugly political overreaction to a lost election. Let's start with kind of what's going on right now, and then where we can go from here. Across the country, and particularly in states like Nevada and Georgia, states that have Republican secretaries of state, where nonetheless the Republican candidate for president did not win. And then in states like Arizona, where we have a Democratic secretary of state, but Republicans control the legislature, the governor's office. States like Michigan, states like even Minnesota, where there's a split legislature, we are seeing a lot of efforts to roll back the right to vote. To make it harder in light of the outcome of the election, which is just crazy because we did have the greatest voter participation of all time in 2020. And now you have these legislatures going, oh gosh, we can't have that. We can't have people voting. And of course, we all know that, again, this is a very cynical political calculus that's going on. Some of the restrictions that we're seeing put into place are increasing the requirements for mail-in voting. We had secretaries of state, such as Republican secretaries of state, such as in Iowa and Louisiana, who went ahead and mailed out applications for an absentee ballot to either all their voters or certain segments of their voters. Their legislatures are telling them, no, you can't do that anymore. Not even the application in advance of the election. We're seeing rollbacks to early voting, days, times, hours, locations. So basically taking away the opportunities, particularly in rural communities and communities of color, to have access to an early voting ballot. One of the things that I'm the most concerned about is penalties against election officials, and not just penalties in the sense of, your office is going to be held accountable, but election officials like county clerks and local election administrators, such as in the state of Florida, can be personally held accountable, personally liable for, alleged violations of the election code. And to speak to that sort of these allegations, we see states that are creating opportunities, right now and up until this point. If you were going to allege a violation of election law, or voter fraud, or, mal or misfeasance on the part of an election official, you had to have some proof, right? Some documented proof to show that that was happening, that, sort of gives your case credence. The burden was on, the folks making the allegations. And now states, like one of the things that's being proposed in Texas, and by the way, God bless those legislators in Texas for coming and hanging out in Albuquerque for a while to keep this horrible bill from being passed. But, one of the things that that bill would do, and that they've done in other states, is to say, you don't even really have to have your proof. You can just have these sort of unverified allegations to move a process forward, right? To move a legal process forward, which is just really, it's scary on a lot of levels. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen, there was a recent New York Times article that talked about how election officials around the country, whether they be, county election administrators, whether they be, poll officials, folks that serve on local election boards, they're quitting. They're leaving office, not just because of these laws, and particularly these really egregious sort of personal penalties that are being brought to bear in some of these states, but also because election officials around the country at all levels, whether it be Secretary of State or local poll worker, have frankly had their lives threatened within the last several months, and I'm included in that mix. And, certainly there are a lot of colleagues out there that have, they've certainly experienced a lot worse than I have, a lot more scary incidences than I have. But the fact is that, this is absolutely an assault and a threat to our democracy, literally. That we are really losing sort of folks that are professional, regardless of their partisan background. They're approaching election administration in a very impartial and fair way with integrity. So, this is the bad news. The good news is here are some opportunities. Here's some light, some silver linings, some light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. We're doing great here in New Mexico. We really are. And even if we did never pass another, pro-voter bill, we still have one of the strongest laws in the country in terms of accessibility, in terms of integrity, in terms of security. We are doing all the right things that we need to do. You don't have to have an excuse to vote by mail. County clerk or my office can automatically mail out an absentee ballot application. We have ample early voting, a full month's worth. In counties that are, larger than a certain size, you can do it not just at the clerk's office, but at other satellite locations. We have same-day voter registration that is, has been implemented through early voting and is now coming into effect for Election Day. We have automatic voter registration at MVD. You can go online and register to vote. And by the way, that feature was really taken advantage of during the pandemic. I was so grateful that we had online voter registration last year when folks were really trying to get registered or update their registration and participate in our democracy last year. We don't require photo voter ID in order to cast a ballot, which, I mean, we are really a bastion for that around the country. And what I will say is, if we look at increasing voter participation like we did in New Mexico last year, 2020 demonstrated the power of mail-in voting. Carol Ann and I were having a little sidebar before everyone came into the room about, there's concerns about the mail. We are in the process of installing permanent ballot drop boxes in counties across the state as we speak. They're going to be 24/7 video monitored. They're going to be tamper-proof. So there are going to be these permanent opportunities moving forward for you to drop your absentee ballot if you choose to vote that way moving forward. So the more vote by mail we see, the more convenient it is for folks to just get their ballot at home and then choose how they want to return it. That seems to be really pro-voter and very pro-voter participation. So the more ways that we have to vote and to return a ballot, people are more eager to participate. We are certainly seeing that. We invested heavily last year in voter education and information. That had a very positive impact on voter participation. And I know that's one thing the league does in particular, is really work to get information out to voters about how, where, and when to cast your ballot, what's on your ballot, who's on your ballot, all of that. So the more we can do that kind of work, the more participation we're going to have. And of course, moving forward, I don't have to tell you all, we need to do a better job with civics education in schools. That's an issue that I'm going to be looking at tackling, hopefully in my upcoming next term. And we also, one of the, I think the big reforms that we need to implement is to ensure that our formerly incarcerated folks do have access to the ballot box. That's something we're still really struggling with to get right here in New Mexico. And I think it's something we'll be able to get done in the next legislative session. So with that, there's a lot more that we can do moving forward. I'll just speak briefly to what's going on at the federal level, and then happy to take any questions that you all have moving forward for the rest of the hour. As you all probably saw, HR 1, S1, the For the People Act sort of died an unceremonious death when we couldn't get enough votes together to overcome the filibuster. I think the filibuster is still going to continue to be a block to any sort of pro-voter legislation, but it's clear to me what's going on in all these states with the restrictions that we're seeing, in Arizona and Texas and Florida and Georgia, et cetera, that at a minimum, what we need to do is resurrect and get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed. Those of you, and I'm sure pretty much all of you are familiar with the fact that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted in the Shelby v. Holder decision that came down about 7 years ago. It completely eradicated the pre-clearance requirement. So all of these former Jim Crow states, anytime they passed a law that had to do with voting, they had to get the thumbs up from the federal government and from DOJ in particular that their law wasn't overly restrictive. And so since that Shelby v. Holder decision, all of these states and states like North Carolina, et cetera, are they would have had to get pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. So we need to put that back into place, because I guarantee you 95% of these egregious laws that are being passed would not be able to move forward if we had that pre-clearance. And I think there's a good shot at that. Even Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who've been kind of, some of our roadblocks in the Democratic caucus on some of these things, have expressed enthusiasm about the Voting Rights Act. There's also some potential life left in a version of SR1H1 I was talking with the ladies before the call about. I don't know the number of the bill. It's Senator Klobuchar's, basically her manager's version is what it's called, of S1 and H1, that basically the basis of it is, sort of all the pieces that were in the original For the People Act, but then took feedback from, election administrators and other stakeholders and kind of made adjustments and amendments, changed implementation timelines. That one's still alive. So we have a lot of potential, right, at the federal level. We need to make sure we're holding our senators' feet to the fire, Senator Heinrich, Senator Lujan. Of course, these are very pro voting rights senators. We're very lucky to have them, but making sure that they're, if the filibuster has to go, in my opinion, in order to get, at least the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed, then it has to go. And whatever we need to do to make that happen, to get protections for our fellow voters around the country, because, hey, it's great that it's real easy to vote here in New Mexico, and we continue to try to make it easier. But man, it's just not fair that if we can vote in a federal election, we have all these options that our family and friends and colleagues and fellow Americans in states like North Carolina and Florida and Georgia and Texas don't, right? I mean, that's just, bottom line, that's un-American in my opinion. And we do need to put some of these sort of baseline protections in place. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I'll let Carol Ann and Lynn, you sort of navigate the question asking piece for me, and appreciate you all having me here today.
Now you want me to put my hand, raise a hand?
You can raise your hand, or you can do the raise the hand in that chat, or you can just, or just put yourself on so I can see that your video is on, right? Because otherwise, if you raise your hand and your video is not on, I can't see that. So do we have I don't see anything in the chat. Maybe Joanne or Amy does. I see Nancy. Do you have a question, Nancy Bartlett?
Hi, we thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to talk to Maggie. And we thank you, Maggie, for all your hard work and the fact that New Mexico is a model. My husband, John, who's a member of the league, has a question.
That's fine. Hi, John.
Seems to me that whatever else is true and whatever else goes on, at some point we need more communication across party lines, and anything in that direction will contribute to many, many issues. In the voting rights aspect, I can even imagine a way of doing that. I know it's hard to believe in the current, but it's a different dynamic. What I have in mind is to take a part of the voting rights issue, and a good part to start on is the identification, voter ID. Everybody agrees there needs to be adequate voter ID, and what's too much, there's pros and cons both ways. It's inconvenient for voters, it's not enough. You can go on forever about that, but there are pros and cons to voter ID. And you could have, I can imagine having a debate, a real debate on the pros and cons of voter ID, of the voter ID issue only. And to make sure it's a real debate, I would even propose that it be done by a high school debating team or a college debating team, UNM debate team, Los Alamos debate team. There's a debate team in Los Alamos at the high school.
I know.
At some time, and have a formal title, a debate on the pros and cons of voter ID. Those at one issue, get a debate team, high school or college, because they would address it as a debate team addresses it, not as parties address it. And those are very different things, as you know.
Yeah.
When you see, voter judges of debate teams score on knowing the pros and cons, the points you make, how well you make them, how well you use your time. They don't score on how well did you follow a party line or how persuasive were you with a party line. So get a debate team, give it a lot of publicity, have a real debate, high school teams, which would be there's a lot of teaching goes on just in doing that much. You get a high school debate team or a college debate team on the TV show debating this. That would be a world changer right there. You never see anything like that. The kids would love it. Kids would learn a lot, and the public would learn a lot. What a debate really looks like. So that is my suggestion to how to begin in some small way to talk about one small part in a different way so that you might get some passage of information across party lines. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'll just say two quick things in response to that. First of all, I have very fond memories of going to the Los Alamos High School Speech and Debate Tournament. They hosted a speech and debate tournament when I was in high school on the speech and debate team. I went to Highland and Albuquerque, and I have very fond memories of that tournament.
I didn't even know that.
Yep, sure did. That was actually, funny enough, I think that's the first time I'd ever been to Los Alamos was for that tournament. And I love the idea. And I think that Los Alamos should host it. And I think that the Los Alamos League should sponsor it, and we'll work with you on that. So, but I really, and honestly would love to do that. I just want to touch on something you said that I think is exactly right. And that the problem is that voting, and in a sense, it really always was partisan, right? Really, since the origins of our country. But I think we're at such a point where, really our democracy is at stake, right? And my personal belief, as a lifelong and very sort of bleeding heart liberal Democrat is that we need two parties in this country, right? We need two sort of strong parties to debate and discuss and have these sort of, these honest disagreements and, come to compromise. And compromise is, of course, an agreement where nobody's happy, right? To move the country forward. And we don't have that right now. And that's really scary. Because we are looking at, a potential breakdown if we can't get there. And I think this idea of having our youth come together and kind of show the so-called adults how to do it is fantastic.
You're saying stuff I would say normally. Thank you.
If I can, I did get a private message, and I won't say who it's from because it came to me privately, but I do want to address it for this person and for the group. The first question was, is the FBI investigating the threats to election officials that I mentioned? And yes, they are, and they have been. They've been incredibly helpful. And not, basically the entire intelligence infrastructure, the federal, of course, Bureau of Investigation from a law enforcement perspective, as well as, I can speak to our, in New Mexico, our state police have been fantastic as well. And I know my colleagues can say the same for their state police. So they absolutely are, and they're taking it very seriously. And there's actually a big conversation going on at the federal level right now about how to take these threats to election officials more seriously and do a better job even than they are doing now. And then the other question was, how are we going to handle a situation where video at the Dropbox isn't working, purposely disabled, somebody dropping off multiple ballots at one time? So not to get into too many details just for purposes of this discussion, but we are going to have this sort of multi-layer monitoring system going on. We'll be able to become aware instantaneously. If there's a disabled video monitor, we'll be able to send someone out to address it at the root immediately or address it from a systems level immediately. It's not going to be 24/7 when there's not an election going on because, there won't be ballots going into the thing. But when an election is going on, when it is receiving ballots, there will literally be eyes on that. Not just the camera, but physical eyes on that box at all times. In terms of dropping off multiple ballots at one time, we already have requirements on the absentee envelope to say that you can't, turn one in unless you have a particular relationship to the voter, you have to sign it. Of course, if we do see someone doing that, we'll have video capture of that. We'll be able to refer it to law enforcement. And I will tell you that that is very rare to begin with. And, it could potentially happen in the mail right now, right? So we already have these laws in place that say it's a felony for you to handle someone else's ballot. But I think the risk of that happening with ballot box is less due to the fact that we're going to have that video monitoring piece. So I feel good about the systems that we're putting in place. And we actually have a rulemaking coming up, just so you all know, next week. We have the proposed rule posted on our website that sort of talks about all of the requirements that we're going to have for those permanent drop boxes and everything that needs to be done to maintain the security. So if you're interested in kind of going through the really, read it if you want to go to sleep, technical details of how we're going to keep those drop boxes secure, please give a look at that. And if you have public comment, please feel free to send it in before next Thursday, which is when our rule hearing is. So I just wanted to address those questions, and now back to y'all.
Lynn, can you kind of monitor this chat so I can go get my eyes dilated?
Bye, Carol Ann. Have fun getting your eyes dilated.
I'll talk to you again later. Thanks you, Maggie, for coming. Lynn, are you there?
I am there and ready, but it sounds like Maggie's doing a good job on her own. Although we also have to.
I can see some in the chat right there. So however you want to. Thanks again, Maggie. Bye-bye. Myself out of here.
I can continue to address the questions in the chat, and then Lynn, if you have questions coming from the group, just let me know. So there is a question about, from Barbara, according to a July 11th article in The Guardian, the lobbying group firms FTI and 535 Group are operating in New Mexico without registering as lobbyists. Is your office aware of this? Yes, we are. And anytime that we become aware of lobbying activity for people that are not registered, the first thing, of course, that we do is double check the system. Sometimes people will do a lobbyist search and, you know, maybe don't look for everything. Sometimes we are able to find that they're a registered lobbyist. And then if we can't verify that ourselves, we basically send them what we call a please explain yourself letter, which basically says, look, we have evidence that, you're conducting lobbying activities, you're not currently registered. Either tell us why you should not be a registered lobbyist, or please go ahead and register ASAP. And then, of course, if there are penalties and fines that need to be assessed as a result of lobbying that has taken place without being registered, we have the authority to do that. So we do have that process. We follow that process in each one of these situations, and we are following that process currently with regard to FTI.
Maggie, Judy Williams has her hand up.
Hi, Judy.
Judy, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, Judy Williams with the Santa Fe League. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me as an interloper, also the State Voter Services Chair. We met with some of your terrific staff the other day, Mandy and Charlotte, about various things, the GIS mapping contract, EIA, and some other voting issues. And something that came up was the fact that SB4, which was, I think, Daniel Ivy Soto's bill in the 2020 session, maybe, which did a lot of the, I think it was a special session where they did a lot of fixes during the pandemic, emergency measures to enable people to vote in different ways. And there was a bill in this last legislature in the 2021 session that would codify those into permanent law, and that did not pass. So my question to Mandy and to you is, what can we do before the session to help promote the need to get that bill passed in the next session, even though it's a budget session, and to get it on the governor's call?
Thanks, Judy. Great question. And, when I mentioned the politics of the legislative session earlier, I think those of you who are particularly in the know that in the last 48 hours of the session, when things got particularly ugly, that's when our hopes for getting that bill passed went away. And so basically, we do what we do after every session is we assess what, good and bad, what happened, and then kind of dust our knees off and put on the big girl and big boy pants and say, how do we get it done next year? So we are actively in the course of doing that. The downside to not getting it passed in this session is that we are moving backward for the regular local election in November. And just for this group's familiarity, what are some of the changes we're talking about? We're talking about really simplifying the absentee ballot return. If you remember, for the general, you were able to just do a signature and last four of your social. Unfortunately, this November, we're going to have to go back to, like 11 different points of information to return your absentee ballot. That's disappointing. We had implemented a cure process for absentee ballots that came back that didn't have all the required information, notification of the voter, the ability for them to quickly and easily provide the signature or the last four of their social. That cure piece has gone away. The consultation with tribes that was required for the general around polling locations has gone away. So we are going to get them back. I am highly confident. They won't be in place for this November, which, what I hate doing to the voting public is doing that kind of whiplash. It's really unfortunate, but I am in talks with our legislative leadership and with the governor. There is general enthusiasm about not only bringing this legislation back, but again, the post incarceration restoration of voting rights. and some other potential things like maybe making Election Day a state holiday here in New Mexico. And, you know, maybe even improving how we do automatic voter registration. So we have some, you know, so a potential sort of package of bills. And I think the governor really gets it. I have not gotten an official confirmation from her yet that she's planning to put it on the call for this coming January session, but I am feeling very optimistic that she will. And at that point, you know, that's when we all need to get to work to make sure we, you know, it's one thing to put it on the call, it's another thing to get them passed. And I know the league knows how to get bills passed. We've done it as a team with other folks for many years now. So we'll get it done this time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. I did get a question in the chat about concern about the filibuster. And, you know, here are my thoughts on the filibuster, you know, because there are obviously pros and cons to getting rid of the filibuster. If you're the party in power, then the filibuster is a great thing. And if you're the party in the minority, it's a terrible thing. And right now we're a 50-50 with one tie-breaking vote situation, which makes it even more confusing. You know, my personal view on the filibuster is that, and I've really come around on this issue because I used to feel very strongly that the filibuster was important. I started to really hate it when you could just say filibuster rather than having to do it. Right? There was a period in time where you had to actually stand on the floor and give a speech and, you know, hold the floor for that period of time. And I was really mad when that went away because it's like, you know, if you're going to use the filibuster, you have to really want to. Seems like, you know, and it was an extreme measure, right? It seems like at a minimum, and I saw that Senator Heinrich recently came out with that position, that at a minimum, he'd be interested in restoring the talking filibuster, which I think is definitely a step in the right direction. But then I started to learn, and you know, this is again just my personal opinion, you know, more about the origins of the filibuster rule and how they were really rooted in protecting a lot of very racist laws and, you know, protections for states that wanted to sort of maintain those sort of racist provisions. And now I sort of have a very sour taste in my mouth based on the origins of the filibuster. And I personally think that, yes, of course, if a different party is in power and we don't like what they're doing, like that's a bad thing. But right now we have gridlock in Congress. We're not doing anything. And I think that 99% of that is due to the filibuster. So that's my personal opinion for what that is worth. Other questions?
Barbara Califf had a question in the chat. It says, according to a July 11th article in The Guardian, the lobbying firms FTI and 535 Group are operating in New Mexico without registering as lobbyists. Is your office aware of this?
And thank you so much, Lynn. I did already answer that one. And yes, and we're on it, but thank you for
Okay.
making sure that I covered everybody. There was a question about the drop boxes in Texas. I don't know the answer to that. I'm so sorry, Ed, but I will find out and I will email Carol Ann and let you know. But that was ridiculous. You are correct. Other questions out there? And that's okay if not, you know.
Maggie, I have a question. It's a little bit of a detailed question. I'm assuming that the SOS candidate listing does not show like our local public school board elections. Is that correct?
We will. I'm trying to think how this is going to work for the local election because usually we do.
Okay.
Let me find out for my staff, but what we will have at a minimum is, of course, your sample ballot when those become available. But I can find out from staff if we're planning to do a full-blown candidate listing like we usually do in our candidate portal. We should be able to, because now all of these candidates have to file with the county clerk. And and it can get uploaded into our portal. So my guess is that we will have that once we kind of get everything. I see that Judy's saying we need that for the voter guides. So we will have that data. I'm sure that we can provide to you all for the guides, but we should also make that, I think, publicly available online. So I'm going to take that as a note to self that we need to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? If not, I will say I will just touch on something real quick that we're also working on right now, which is redistricting. And I know, Judy mentioned that we're moving forward in our office. There was a League of Women Voters originated bill that did pass this last session, which is, I think, going to be really great, not just for voters and groups like the League, campaigns, active citizens, but for our county clerks, which is we're implementing a GIS, Global Information Systems Mapping project, where we are going to basically create every precinct map, every district map for every political district, counties, et cetera, working together with GIS colleagues at the University of New Mexico, and make that information, not just the maps themselves, but the underlying data, which are called shape files, available for free on the internet. And that is going to be, I think, a really great resource for citizens. And again, candidates, campaigns, voters, political parties, groups that want to do any sort of get out the vote effort. I know it's going to be great for the League in terms of, really fleshing out your online voter guide stuff that you all do. So we're looking forward to that, but also this is how we're going to generate our base maps for the legislature and for the Citizen Redistricting Committee to undertake their work that they're going to be undertaking in the next few months. And for those of you who don't know, there by state law has been established a Citizen Redistricting Committee. They're starting their work here in the next few weeks. They're going to be taking a roadshow around the state to gather feedback. And they're going to generate 3 options for districting maps for Congress, for state legislature to present to the legislature for their consideration. My understanding is that, and it still hasn't been decided yet, but that there will probably be a special session in December to tackle redistricting. And so, I don't have to tell members of this group how important and critical the redistricting process is. Just in case you weren't aware of sort of the time frame and the process that's going to take place, I wanted to make you aware. There will be ample opportunity to provide comment to the Citizen Redistricting Committee and to the legislature when they undertake their redistricting special session at the end of the year. So, please be engaged in that process. We will, to the extent that we're going to be providing that sort of basic information for them to work with. And so we're looking forward to that process, and, redistricting is never an easy process. So hopefully it will be as painless as possible this year. I got a question. What should we be doing to help you and other secretaries of state? Well, first of all, speaking from my point of view, I see the League as just such a tremendous partner. I think we have here in New Mexico a really good relationship with you all. We're in constant communication. We work together on projects. The League is able to amplify and make their members and the general public aware of the initiatives of our office, of bells and whistles and tools that we implement to make it easier for voters to find out how, where, and when to cast their ballot. In return, we are able to, let voters know if they want information about who's on their ballot to be able to go to the League and to go to Vote 411 and all of those things. So that is certainly appreciated here, and I know that it's appreciated in other states. what I'm about to say next isn't intended to be political. So just to be clear about that, but we're going to have, in my opinion, a very ugly election year next year. I think we all sort of know and feel that in our bones. And I think the races for Secretary of State are going to be particularly contentious. I think the office of Secretary of State is way high on everybody's radar next year. And so I would say to you all here in New Mexico and to your members, anything that you can do to vocalize support for the work of secretaries of state across the country. You know, I mean, I think a really good example is Brad Raffensperger in Georgia. He is a self-declared conservative Republican. He wanted President Trump to be reelected. And he took the ethics of his job to heart and implemented his job fairly, and the votes did not fall that way in Georgia. And so I think, you know, particularly in these states where, you know, folks are really getting the heavy duty political treatment for just doing their jobs. Anytime that you or members or folks, you know, can vocalize support for those folks and their work, I think is incredibly critical at this time. So thank you for that question.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hi, Nancy.
I'm not sure you're the one to ask it of, but John and I used to go to Bandelier every 4th of July to attend the ceremony of the naturalization of citizens. Has that fallen off because of the immigration controversy, or how's it doing? Are you involved in that?
You know, I don't know. I know that there still is naturalization. There are still naturalization processes going on. I think that particularly, I'm aware that last year, of course, most of the in-person naturalization processes were basically canceled due to COVID. I have actually a very close personal friend who was naturalized last year, and it felt very anticlimactic for her because, you know, she went in the morning and took her test, and then, you know, they called her and let her know she passed. And so she came back in the afternoon. It was just her and some guy, you know, and she got her swearing in, you know, in masks in an office, you know, so it didn't have the pomp and circumstance. But I think to the extent that based on my understanding, to the extent that those in-person ceremonies have diminished, it's been largely in the last year because of COVID. I don't know what the plans are to bring them back. I will find out and let you know. So I'm going to make a note to myself. Thanks for asking.
Because we're wondering whether the voters who are naturally born should at some point learn those 100 questions. And we think those people who are naturalized are perhaps more in tune to civics than the rest of us.
Oh, well, you know, I agree with that. I think
yeah, you can ask.
I have another thought. I've thought a lot about how did Congress get the way it is today? And one thing that occurs to me is the rules of Congress. Uh-huh. I look at the rules of Congress and I look at Robert's Rules of Order, the way everything else is sort of governed and proceeds. And I look at the tremendous difference. Robert's Rules of Order cares a whole lot about majorities and minorities, and it talks about both, especially a large minority. It talks about meaning more than a third. Well, everything in Congress has more than a third on one side. So but the way Congress runs is if you have a majority of one in a House, you have what amounts to monopolistic powers in that House. And that huge difference between the general push brought about by Robert's Rules of Order and brought about by the Congress's rules in the Houses is so huge. And you look at what goes on, and I just wonder if there isn't worthwhile over time to give more thought to that aspect. Who set those rules? Those aren't in the Constitution. Parties are not in the Constitution.
That's right.
But Congress sets its rules now to how Congress runs. Does that mean Congress sets its own rules to what Congress does? You know, it's a very complex, long ongoing, and the results of it right now are not good.
So I'm going to take that suggestion, and I'm going to make a counter suggestion, or I guess a corollary suggestion, which is that the league undertake as a national policy to ask any candidate in a forum and in their voter guide moving forward if they are willing to take on congressional rule reform to democratize Congress, and you know, do a campaign and make a push for that. And so every person who runs for Congress in 2022 should be asked the question on the record whether they will push to undertake congressional rule reform, because I think that is a fantastic point. And
I appreciate your comments. You couldn't have advanced my cause further.
I'm here. So for those who don't know, I've paid John $50. He and I are a tag team. We're gonna, no, I'm just kidding.
Oh, you don't know, I pay Maggie a few dollars.
Yeah, but if for you that don't know, Maggie went to UNM with our son, John Bartlett.
I sure did. Used to, back when I was a musician,
Yes.
in my former life.
Oh.
I don't know if there's anything else.
There's one more question by Ed Birnbaum down there, and then we'll have to think about wrapping up.
Okay. Let me see. Oh, there it is. Okay. One key issue that doesn't get a lot of press is voter intimidation at the ballot box. Some states limit how close candidate supporters can get to voters, some don't. Now they're talking about allowing partisans into the voting place, which sounds scary to me. I agree. And Ed, I wonder if you listened to that that podcast trying to think, Chloe Chase is her name, or Zoe Chase, I mean, and she did a podcast about some alleged voter fraud in North Carolina, and, you know, these voter guides that were being handed out sort of, you know, very close to the polling place, these sort of like slate ticket things. I wonder if that's what brought your question up, but there was also a lot of, in 2020, a lot of fear. And I know here in New Mexico, we were very concerned about, you know, our sort of vigilantes, so to speak, gonna go sort of, you know, decide they were gonna go barrel into the polling place just to, you know, be a, you all remember the stand down and stand by comment, you know, from the former president, and, you know, were there going to be folks just sort of intruding on the polling place and maybe intimidating voters? What I will say, you know, and I agree that that's scary. We take that very seriously here in New Mexico. We are really trying to make sure, you know, of course, there is an allowance for quote unquote party challengers and for certain designated election observers to be in the polling place. One of the aspects of the bills that we are trying to get passed is to continue those protections so that, you know, they have a very limited role. We want transparency in the polling place. We want to make sure that the processes, you know, do have those eyes of both parties and independent folks. We don't have anything to hide. In fact, we're very proud of how we run elections, but we don't want to provide an opportunity for voter intimidation to take place, for the voting process to be obstructed, for poll officials to be kept from doing their jobs appropriately. So we have to really strike that careful balance. And for me personally, that is something that I take very seriously. It is a hill that I will die on because I completely agree that opening up polling places to just sort of like anybody can be there and potentially obstruct the voting process is very scary and very anti-democratic to me. So in terms of talking about protections at a national level, again, I don't want you to worry too much about New Mexico because I think we're in a good spot here. We're going to continue to be in a good spot. It is concerning in other places. And that's something you need to make sure you're reaching out to Congresswoman Leisure Fernandez, Senators Heinrich and Lujan about, and make sure it's on their radar.
If I could just follow up, whoops.
Here, let me mute.
Okay. So, no, yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. I don't seem to be, well, I guess I'll fix it. Did you turn down your? Okay, sorry. So in Philly, I
There we
think
go.
there was a rule, you had to be, you couldn't carry signs and hand out literature within 100 feet of the polling place. I don't actually know what the rule is in New Mexico, but what's
the
even
same.
worse to me is that if you can, people can line the area where you're walking through and they carry guns,
Yeah.
with open carry states, then you have a really serious problem. And I mean,
Yep.
we can't have tons of police at every polling station. It seems impractical. So I don't know how we're going to handle that if that's what starts to happen now in future elections.
Well, I have good news for you. So first of all, the rule's the same, 100 feet. Secondly, one of the things that we've developed in the last year that we implemented for both elections in 2020 is something called a situational awareness room. So we work very closely with both our federal and state law enforcement partners. We work with DHS, we work with FBI, we work with state police, we work with local law enforcement. And on election day, we have 2 different situational awareness rooms set up. We have one set up with our county local election officials and our office and a couple of representatives from federal and state law enforcement. And then we have a separate room for all of the law enforcement agencies that, you know, sort of, so basically there is constant communication going on leading up to and during election day about what's going on out there. And anytime we get a call, if it comes into the county, if it comes into the state, we have state attorney general monitors that are always out and about putting eyes on the situation. We are able to know right away when and if there's ever an issue like that arising. And again, this was a particular concern of mine in 2020 that sort of thing was going to happen. We can dispatch law enforcement like that to go handle the situation. And so that's something that I'm particularly proud of that we've been able to do, and not just, you know, a bunch of people with an open carry. You know, let's say someone runs into a light pole and the electricity goes out, you know, in the block that there's a polling place. We're able to deal with that instantaneously. Gas leak, we're able to deal with that instantaneously. Traffic jam, you know, and so we have this sort of great instantaneous communication network that we're dealing with now. And it's really, I think, massively improved our situational awareness and our ability to be able to address those kinds of issues in a very timely way.
Good. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for having me today. I know, Lynn, do you want to?
I just wanted to thank you very much. We always enjoy having you. You're always full of information. And thank you very much, Maggie.
Thank you so much. Oh, and somebody mentioned Naomi Maestas and her team. And let me just make sure I give a shout out. They are incredible. Naomi's incredible. Los Alamos County, 2 thumbs up on all levels. You guys are doing great there. And thank you all so much. It was so great to be with you. And hopefully I'll see you in person again next time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.